we'll kick off right now. So thank you everyone for joining today. We're very excited to get this started, and thank you so much for joining us. Our webinar today will be focused on engaging remote employees in the evolving workplace. My name is Jimmy Monchal, and I lead part of the marketing team here at Class. I'll be moderating the conversation today with our panelists, and I'll introduce you to all of them in just a moment. Today, we'll be talking about the challenge of remote employee engagement and kind of 4 tips for engaging remote employees. I'm very excited for the conversation we'll have. You'll hear a lot of good insights, different perspectives from all types of organizations, from startups to large, and kind of how they're addressing different things as they've have gone through the change to a more distributed workforce. If you do have questions for our panelists, please ask them in the Q&A throughout the session at the bottom. We will grab those questions and answer them towards the end. And for those of you who are watching this at a later time, you can always email your questions to hello@class.com, and we'll get back to you there. All right, so I'll go ahead and pop over to our agenda for today. So in just a minute, I'll introduce the panelists joining us today, but we'll talk a little bit about Class and the solution that we offer. And then the majority of our time will be spent talking through the challenges around the evolving workplace and kind of sharing some tips for engaging remote workers. We'll then leave some time at the end for audience questions that come up throughout the session. So on our panel today, I'm pleased to introduce Clint Coford, who is the Global Head of Talent Development at the Human Performance Institute, Johnson & Johnson. We have Eric Polite, VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion from Canaries, and Michelle Smith, the SVP of Integrations and Operations at Miller Management Corporation. So very excited for this great panelist of all different backgrounds to kind of join us today. So just really quickly, the COVID-19 pandemic kind of did push many businesses to use and rely on synchronous tools more than they historically have. So many businesses were already doing some level of distributed working, but the pandemic has sped up that adoption of a more remote workforce. So even as we're seeing signs of relief, many organizations are planning to kind of utilize a distributed workforce into the future. However, there are a lot of challenges in using the current tools available to engage employees effectively in the remote workplace. And that kind of led to the idea of Class. So we originally were focused on solving the immediate need of education institutions, but we have started to adapt the product to address the gaps we were seeing in the hybrid workplace. So, Class, we add a concrete set of training collaboration tools built on top of Zoom, designed to enhance Zoom's web conferencing platform that many organizations have grown to trust and are leveraging for remote workers. So with a new way to conduct team meetings, stand-ups, training, and other critical areas with a tool like Class, we were helping solve some of those major pain points our partners have been feeling from the traditional virtual tools available. We encourage you to visit class.com and check out the website, videos, and other content to learn more about the product and our mission at Class. And with that, we will not talk about Class anymore, but I wanted to get that out of the way. So let's kind of jump into some of the trends in the workplace that we're seeing. So the first one being kind of the challenge organizations are facing when it comes to remote employee engagement. And these are some of the first of their kind. The typical work environment has shifted, and the way we work inside the organization has changed with it. So while working from home was once seen as a benefit, it's now seen as a necessity. And outside the new coworkers, like our dogs and cats, who are always curious and maybe in our business at the wrong times, we are still seeing gaps in equitable access to technology and good internet. It's harder to connect with employees in a remote setting and foster the connection we're used to having amongst teams and new employees. And lastly, it's hard to measure engagement and productivity outside those basic outputs that we can see from the business. In addition, the impact of remote work has also kind of accented some of the major or typical employee concerns, I should say, that you see in a distributed environment. It seems that the environment and not having our typical water cooler or casual interaction can take its tolls. And in addition, sometimes using text over, speaking verbally in person can lead to a misunderstanding of tone and sentiment, which has then exacerbated some of the problems that some employees feel. So without further ado, I wanted to jump into kind of more of the trends in the workplace and get our panel speaking with us today. So the first thing that we're focusing on is, the number of employees working remotely 5 days per week in the US has grown from 17% to 44% over the course of the last year. And with many of those organizations announcing their embrace of a remote workforce into the future, we will continue to see that number rise. So this leads to a need for companies to kind of establish new practices to keep engagement and productivity high in these new remote hybrid environments. So with that, one of the first things I would ask, and I think I'll start with Eric today, is was remote work a part of your company culture before 2020, and kind of how things have shifted since that time?
Yes, Jimmy. First, thanks for having us. there has been a shift, and I have a unique experience in two work environments recently, and watching that change over time. Currently, I'm in a startup where I think we've been forced to be nimble when you're beginning. So when there was a shift to remote work, it was pretty simple: get computers out to the people, get the new tech tools, and people just jump in. And I think there's actually a familiarity there that supports that. Now, my previous employer is a Fortune 50 company with over 50,000 employees dispersed across North America. And it's been quite a different shift because of the change in culture and the challenges. So it's not as simple as providing technical tools. Here is Microsoft Teams, or here are these Slack, or here are these things that you can use. There has to be a shift in the culture and the mindset of the people to embrace those tools and to embrace the idea of remote work and how to navigate that territory differently than my experience in a startup. So I think it has really pushed organizations to think more deeply about the pieces to add on beyond, again, just tools. It's about people, and the people work, and the focus on people is at the core of it.
Yeah, I think earlier on when we were doing our prep, you guys spoke about the human connection and needing that human connection more and more. And so I think that's a great way to accent it. And it's interesting hearing about it from both the startup and the large organizations and how they're having to adapt. So going into the next question, what kind of practices did you initially establish for remote employees and throughout last year, and as they've started to shift towards hybrid work? And I'll pass this one to Michelle to go ahead and cover.
Well, you first learn how to make sure you're unmuted when it's your turn to talk. It's interesting. It's so much of our work around creating work environments was philosophical. Prior to COVID, it was really what are our mission, vision, values? What are the leadership behaviors that are intentional and we want to aspire in our organization? And so you have those philosophical discussions that are so good and valuable. And then COVID came, and it all of a sudden became this physical reality as well. And so identifying first, what are the resources and tools that people need to be successful? And that's individual for everyone, right? That is not only based on their job responsibilities, but it's individual to their needs to be able to focus, to be able to share based on their personality styles, their home environments. So making sure that we were providing support specifically to people and the resources that they need was first and foremost. Making sure they understand to use the tools that we were using to communicate, make sure that leaders knew what was safe and responsible for us to do with employees, as well as they engaged and things moved on. I will tell you, Jimmy, I wish that I had this perfect playbook of here's what you do in a hybrid situation and getting through a global pandemic. And I don't. And I didn't have a playbook prior to the pandemic either, because we were in an environment that was constantly changing and shifting due to technology, in my opinion. And so I would tell you now is we don't know what we don't know. And we need to be able to, as leaders, continue to be open-minded and really aware and thoughtful of the things that people are going to need to be successful, and what the environment's going to look even 60 days from now.
Definitely. That's a great point. I love the way that you position that. And we don't have a playbook, and we've had to learn a lot. I think that's a great way to put it. And so, yeah, I'm excited to kind of hear more about what you guys have done to kind of help address this and some of the things you've learned along the way. Maybe Clint, is there anything that you would add in there for any practices that you've had to establish for remote employees throughout the last year? Anything that you had to do as you've shifted to more hybrid work?
Yeah, I mean, I think Johnson & Johnson obviously is a very, very large, company. We have 140,000 employees. You add in contractors, and I'm sure we're probably north of 200,000 people. And so we have had, a number of, on-site, heroes that have continued to come to the workplace day in and day out to help make sure that all of our, key products are available for, the world, as well as, our folks in the R&D space working on the vaccine. And so we have a large chunk of the population that's always been coming to work. And then, for everybody else, it's like Michelle said, there's no playbook. We've been kind of making do. I think depending on what part of J&J you sat in, there has been flexibility in the past. I worked from home pretty regularly on Fridays. But I think it definitely, all of a sudden, everybody being all virtual, it created a new dynamic. I think we got used to that dynamic, and you find your way through that. I think what's going to be more interesting is as case counts continue to go down, as the vaccines go up, and we find ourselves in more of a true hybrid. So, I think right now we're in a situation where pretty much everybody is virtual, and we're connecting, in my team and the teams project teams that I'm part of, everybody's virtual. It makes it pretty easy. It's a level playing field. What I, I'm interested to see is, how we continue to lean into this idea of being super inclusive, but as we actually get back to more of a true kind of hybrid environment where maybe 60% of people are back in the office to some degree, and then you have people at home, and I think that's we don't have a playbook for that either, and I think we're trying to figure out how we do that, and I think in the wake of particularly the pandemic of social injustice that hit us last year, we've really got to be focused on how we do this in an inclusive way, because the technology has its amazing upsides, and I think it has some pretty big downsides when it comes to the idea of operating a hybrid team.
Yes, I agree. I think that makes sense quite a bit, actually. And kind of one of the things we are also looking at is like, what has been some of the bigger challenges with the increase of remote employees? As we've had more remote employees coming on, and I think as we talk a little bit more in a second about the hybrid challenges as well, what was some of the biggest challenges you think that you saw, Eric, and throughout last year, and getting more and more remote employees on board?
I would really say, just what Michelle and Clint shared was resonant, in so much as I think this period, whether it be 2020, the global pandemic, it really is a litmus test, a barometer of, I think, organizational agility and flexibility more than anything, right? Are you in a place organizationally to shift and change, particularly in this what we call a VUCA environment, right? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That is pretty constant now. Change is a constant, and there are organizations that were able to flex a little bit more than others, and have a strength in some things that were stable, but weren't able to actually make that shift. And I would say that also happens on an individual level. Like, what is our individual tolerance for change? People don't like change. we thrive on stability, and so that is the other piece. So, in an individual and an organizational level, it really is, how do you help people through change? At the end of the day, we have to think about the human side of change, which I believe, which Michelle was touching on as well. Are we focused on the human side of change, or it's like, no, here's your tech, here's your thing, let's move to the next thing, and forget those elements? So I can't pinpoint one thing. It really is how do we collectively in our work, and particularly leaders, help people through this change with an understanding that there's more to come, and maybe not at the same level and scale as what we're experiencing globally right now, but change is a constant. And how do you help people through that? How do you help teams through it? How do you help leaders through it? And organizationally, how do you move through it and make sure you have the agility to respond when things come up, to respond? Because if not, it feels like a lump of coal, but yes, with enough pressure, you can find that diamond in there. But it takes some time. It takes some time.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that was lost maybe at first on some organizations, was this isn't just about a business change. To the point you guys are making, this is really a change that we're having to embrace at a personal level for individuals. And yes, to your point, it's a really good one, that the change is hard, regardless whether that's in the workplace or at home or wherever it may be. And there's different levels that we're kind of dealing with this on. So definitely, probably one of the biggest challenges is trying to be there correctly for your your employees, and to do the right thing for them, which I think everyone's kind of echoing here, which I think is an important thing to highlight. So love the takeaway. The next area would be around like as we're going more into hybrid. So Clint, to your point, like as we go more into hybrid and more of just, today where we're kind of all in virtual because we have to be, but as we see these numbers go down, as we continue to see the positives that we're seeing from the vaccines, when we see more of a hybrid workplace, what are some of the things that we can do to kind of have more of those casual interactions? So Michelle, for you, how are you thinking of creating time for casual interactions for remote employees into the future?
Yeah, I think this is a great focus. At the end of the day, I believe that what people miss the most is people, right? That's what we miss is people and those interactions. And so I see this hybrid in the future of work environments being gathering places and being almost clubhouses and gathering places where you can connect, but you can still develop and you can still feel the culture that lives within the organization, because it's the personality of an organization. And so I think it's really important to take a step back and be thoughtful and identify some things that you could do to still create that community. And I keep going back to that word because I think it's really important. We want to build these sense of belonging and to foster that within the organization. And so one thing that we found previously to this new role with our Miller Management Company, I was with the Utah Jazz as a chief people officer there, and we recently sold the Jazz and now are minority owners. But I will speak back to that time, and we were all 100% remote, missing the people, and the leadership team especially missed those interactions by the water cooler or walking down a hall or just being in the kitchen and grabbing a Coke or microwaving something. Those just little interactions with an employee that typically wasn't in your sphere of day-to-day interactions. And so we created a program called Exec Connect. And each week, senior leaders were randomly assigned employees within the organization. We were about 3,500 at that point. You could be assigned someone who's a full-time custodial worker at the arena. And you could also be assigned to somebody who is a senior leader on the management team. We really wanted it to be, again, recreate those interactions that would just randomly happen. And so leaders were assigned 2 people each week. We were thoughtful as a team, as a people and culture team, to provide them as much information to make the interaction as comfortable as possible. So they not only got their name and contact information, but they also learned a little bit about their job responsibilities, their tenure with the organization, any key details that could help create that comfort level when the phone call was made. And I got some great feedback. Initially employees would tell me it kind of freaked me out when the CFO is calling me or when you're calling me, Michelle, as the head of HR, why are you calling me? But once we got through that and they realized it was just a casual conversation to say, how are you, my friend? Like, how are you? What are you feeling? What do you need? And let me tell you how I am. Like, this is hard and I miss you. Or, you know what? I'm loving the time with my kids. Like that has been such a plus, and just having a good conversation. And we got so much great feedback. And even the feedback that from some that I never would have had a chance to connect with that person had we not done this. So there is opportunities that are coming out of this last year and all of the changes. So there's kind of a best practice or idea to share with the group.
Yeah, I love that. I really like that idea, and I know I miss that office interaction. I didn't realize how much I would miss it, and really I do miss that. Just the small casual things like you talked about, going to the break room and grabbing a Coke, and that's all been part of like how I've usually built relationships and continue to maintain those. And so I love you being purposeful with your time, really thinking about how we carve this out and make sure that we make time for it for the employees. I think that's so critical. And then Clint, kind of looking over you, like how are you thinking of creating interactions between those in the office and those at home once we do go more to a hybrid type environment? Are there ways you're thinking that you could possibly go to the market go to your company and start changing the way we interact, to help kind of support that as we go?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, what my team does is we lead kind of all the leadership development efforts, for the organization. And so to me, it's, it's this whole pandemic is, as Eric kind of talked about, it's tested organizations' agility. I think it's also testing, the effectiveness and the quality of our leaders, because, there's so many things that I can't control from the company's perspective, but what I can control is how I engage with my team, how I show up transparently, authentically, show that I care, and include them. So I think part of it, as Michelle talked about, is just creating time and recognizing that, our days actually have gotten longer as we've gone virtual. So, minus commute time, we're back to back probably more than we've ever been. And it's okay. We have to remember that when you go back to the office, or if you haven't been, that there is still downtime in the office as you go to the break room and as you pop down the hall for something. And so recreating those as much as we can, I think is great. And I think Michelle gave some fantastic tips there. I'd say one other thing that we are focused on, my team practices this, and we talk a lot about this as a key part of resilience is at Johnson & Johnson is around gratitude. So I start every meeting with my team around, we call it positive gossip, but it's basically 10 minutes for people to kind of share what they're grateful for and what they've seen in others. And it just completely changes the course of a meeting. We've increased the cadence and the frequency of our meetings because we know that people, need to be connected, but starting by talking about what we're grateful for, what we do have, it changes the neurological, pathways in our brain that get us focused on the positive, and really help us, I think, to ultimately be more resilient in the face of, challenges that we encounter every single day.
Yeah, and I really like the way you said, like being authentic and being genuine, like having that come through it's kind of hard to do. And it sounds like, if we can somehow find a way to do that, I think that connection continues to grow and grow, and allowing space inside as a leader, it sounds like from what you're saying, to allow those interactions, the 10 minutes of positive gossip, for example. I love that kind of that thought, because we need that time. It's not just all about, work in this environment. We're kind of in our own homes. And if we don't create that space for them, as you both, Michelle, and you've been talking about, I think it can be easily lost. So I definitely like those tips. And positive gossip is a new way of me hearing that. I haven't heard about it that way. I love that saying, though. And then for Eric, for you, kind of what practices have you found to be most effective for company morale? You spoke about some earlier. I'd love to hear more of those now, if we could.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an ongoing piece of work, so that, both Michelle and Clint referred to this idea, at least from my understanding, that it can't be, the commitment to growing morale can't be performative. It's got to be personal and practical. And it really depends on the foundation you laid before the pandemic. You can't kick it into high gear now and do something you haven't been doing. Everybody has a tagline, right? Or it says, people are our greatest asset. And this is testing the veracity of that statement for many organizations in terms of what they're doing. For us, it is about building deeper connections and relationships in ways that feel natural. So we're doing social hours, or weekly virtual social hours, right? Which have scavenger hunts and trivia, and to Clint's point, changing up the way we do meetings, that it's not just about content, it's about process and about people. How do we connect at the beginning of the meeting that sets the tone for that meeting? That if we don't get through the agenda, it's okay, because we want to know that people are okay. And I have a hypothesis, just hearing Clint speak, that people are working longer and more now than they did at work. When I think of being at work pre-pandemic, and the number of conversations that were at the water cooler and at the coffee, that it kind of shortened how many hours people were actually working. Whereas now, back-to-back Zoom meetings, meetings this, that, and work to do, it's like you're getting more time, less commute time. People are putting in more time, which means that you have to be thoughtful of how you provide those respites. Where are places for people to recharge, to reconnect, and being thoughtful about how to put those in. And sometimes that means, actually, most of the times that means addition by subtraction. You have to take something off of the table in order to create space for that, which is can be a rub point. It's like, well, we're not getting productivity. Well, you can increase productivity by taking some time back in order to give people space to think, to breathe, and actually to innovate, to be more creative, to connect on a personal level, and know who they are. So those are the things that that remind me of some of the things you already do. But like I said, social happy hour is something we do, and then lunch and learns. And lunch and learns now remote mean, hey, here is everyone who joins the lunch and learn gets an Uber Eats, gift card for $20, $25. Get your lunch on us, because we're saving money, but we're investing in you. Grab a lunch and connect now to learn and connect together around something that's important. So those are the types of things that you can use we've used to sort of build morale, build connection in lieu of not having physical connection.
Yeah, those virtual social hours, I think, are so critical, and kind of making that time. We've been doing things like taking turns of signing up to tell stories, and then one tells a story, maybe 5 people, and instead of having to like the talk over each other, which happens sometimes, now you have someone who's focused and talking, and you can listen and hear the stories. And so those have been really helpful, especially for our company as we're newer and we're just getting started and have a lot of new employees getting to know each other. And so those have been super critical, I think, in getting more of that casual interaction. And so next, I'd kind of switch over to more of like, how do we establish and build trust? So we talked a little bit about the casual interactions. Is there anything different that you do, or how do you think about building trust within teams or departments or on a company level? And kind of how is that different from when you had an office space? So would anyone like to tackle that one first?
I'll share some thoughts. So as organizations, we're always looking for that differentiator, right? That competitive advantage from others in the market that we live in, the space we live. And as a Miller group of companies, we are really a diverse portfolio of several different companies in a wide array of industries. But the one common thing is the driver, I would say, is those leadership behaviors that are most important to driving the success, right? For us, it's to drive excellence and our mission to enrich lives. And so what are those specific leadership behaviors that we want to ensure are instilled in our organization? And that's to build trust, right? So my point is, I think that leaders are going to have to be even more self-aware than they ever have been, and be willing to step back. And Clint, I loved everything you shared that you're doing with your team and approaching authentically, because let's be honest, sitting now on a screen for the first time and seeing yourself constantly on a video, and being able to now need to work even harder to have your voice heard than you probably did in an office setting, it's all vulnerable. Like, everything is super vulnerable. And Clint, I loved what you said, because I do believe the secret sauce to vulnerability is gratitude. It's gratitude. It's being able to see the things that you're grateful for that have brought you to that vulnerability. So I really think that leaders are going to have to take inventory of themselves, make sure that they are projecting and being the leader that will allow that group of people that they're working for to present themselves authentically, to be able to share openly. I mean, this is where you're going to get creativity. This is where you're going to innovation and problem solving is going to live in that area. But if you have a leader that's not walking the walk, and that is not being able to see you as an individual and creating that environment for you to be successful, it's just, everything's going to struggle. Everything is really going to struggle, and you're not going to be a part of the community. And more than likely, things will change.
I love that. Eric, Clint, anything to add there before we jump over to looking at some more recognition in the hybrid workplace?
Go ahead.
I was just going to point out, I think you have the word, on your slide here, consistent. And I think, building on what Michelle said, it really takes consistency to build the trust. If we, last year was particularly tough because we had not only the coronavirus pandemic, but, a pandemic of social injustice. And as we talk about that with our teams. I know at J&J, we had a lot of really good conversations about race and about social injustice that were really helpful in the wake of George Floyd's tragic death. But that can't be a one and done, right? If you want to build trust with your team about who you are and how you lead on, that topic, like that has to be something that continues on. You have to continue to check on, families and how they're dealing with. I mean, yes, we're all probably dealing with kids still doing virtual school or some kind of, challenge, but you can't just gloss over that. That has to be a consistent thing that you bring up and you talk about. And so how we show up, our authenticity really kind of comes to bear as we're as both what we talk about and how often we talk about those things as leaders. And I think, just being able to demonstrate that, I think is a point, Eric made earlier, that we really do care about these people. And it's a test of us as leaders, that if we care, we've got to be consistent and show up, regularly there for them, regardless of what else is going on. Otherwise, I think it comes across very, very fake.
Yes, and completely, like I said, performative. So that resonates. And so the addendum I make here is like establish and build trust across lines of difference, because what naturally happens is we're more able or facile in building trust with people like us, whatever that like us is. The question here, particularly in diverse and divergent teams, is are you able to build trust and connection with people who have maybe a different perspective, worldview, approach, culture than yourself? And I think it still comes down maybe to the things that Colby talks about, like character and competence, right? Do you have integrity, values that you live out that I can see and observe? And then are you competent in what you do in terms of building trust? But particularly in light of the social movement and even the unrest, do you have enough self-awareness, to Michelle's point, of your own experience with difference in others? Maybe some of your blind spots, biases, and triggers. Are you open and available to discuss those with others in a way that says, okay, yeah, I can trust you, or at least start to trust you, because I know you and I think you know me at my core, not what you might see on the outside or what I sort of let you see, but we've actually connected and have relationships, so that when that call comes from you, it doesn't seem out of the blue, like, oh my gosh, we don't really talk like this. So why are we talking like this now? You started to build relationship, build connection, and really deepen that trust. And that is really at the core of community. I think Parker Palmer said, community is that place where the person you least want to live with always lives, which is a reminder of the ways in which we would naturally crash into each other. But at the root of it is this ability to build trust, to build connection in service of a larger goal and a larger purpose, which in most cases is the mission of the organization. It's incumbent upon managers and leaders to bring everyone under the tent in order to do that, to build those trust relationships and to model that piece of integrity and commitment.
Just fantastic. Great comments there. And I think a bunch of great takeaways for us as an audience to hear about and to learn from. I'm really, really, really impressed with that area and what you guys have brought up there. That was really good talk. So good conversation, I should say. So thank you so much for sharing. And as we continue on here, outside of trust, like the other area I hear all the time is, how do we actually give recognition in a hybrid workplace? We used to have things like, how do you incentivize people properly? And what are different ways to, celebrate high performance and president's clubs that are the old days of maybe some sales performance. How are we trying to replace some of that? So, maybe I'll start with you, Eric. How do you share like a celebratory moment with your remote employees in kind of a hybrid workspace, or what are you trying to think of how to kind of, share those moments with them?
We think about it in a number of different ways, but largely it is acknowledgments in meetings, in conversations, in building a natural way of doing it. It doesn't have to be at a specific point. It's just like, let somebody know, applaud, communicate, recognize like the little things, and not just high performance. I think it's also a shift, particularly in the moment now, in terms of building culture, to recognize and reward people who are living out your values, right? Like really demonstrating that in their behavior, not just around performance, because that suggests that performance is the thing. If you reach all your goals, but there's a scorched earth in the process and to the people, then it's okay, right? As long as we hit targets. Right now, more than ever, I think it's important to reward people who are really leaning into your organizational values, your cultural priorities in terms of building and establishing a strong, psychologically safe place to work and contribute and give. So those are the things that really come to mind. And then, balancing that with intrinsic rewards more than extrinsic rewards and recognition. And then the other thing that I'll add just selfishly is to this point of knowing your people, I have a preference for introversion. So know how your people like to get feedback. Feedback isn't just a negative thing. How do you want to get feedback? Well, recognition reward is a form of feedback. I do not want to be put in the spotlight. I might seek something or want something else for you to know that, for you to let me know that you think I'm doing a good job. So do you know your employees well enough, your team members well enough to know how they want to receive feedback and what would be valuable for them? And that does vary based on a number of factors, but one would be, introversion versus a preference for introversion versus extroversion.
Definitely great points there. I also lean a little bit more introversion, so I can relate to that. Recharging at home is my best way to do it.
Yes.
My wife's the other side, so it's always a fun balance at home. Michelle, kind of how do you kind of approach this at your company? What are you guys doing?
Yeah, I think Eric said it very, very well. You need to understand your people and know how they best receive recognition. And it creates value for them. So stepping back, seeing that. I'll tell you just personally, one thing that I loved that I found in the last year was the enjoyment I had for writing and mailing cards or notes to people that were, blessing my life or that I saw thriving and wanted to acknowledge that. And so I got in this wonderful habit this last year of taking time in the evening, because you're absolutely right, Clint, there's no end to our day anymore. And I have just a whole pile of note cards and stationery, and I just write notes and mail them to their homes now. And I will tell you, my favorite thing is when I open my mailbox and I have a card back now. Like, it is such a lost art. We always knew that writing thank you cards was all this lost art. But the value that I feel in receiving those and the enjoyment that I get in sharing what I am seeing, you are seen, and being able to tell them you are seen, you are appreciated, you are respected, you are valued, has gone a long way to be able to do that through a pen and paper and put it in the mailbox. I also know there's incredible platforms out there that are now very user-friendly and can interact from a technology standpoint with employees. So that, we live in this day and age where there's so many options. You just have to choose to seek out what best suits your mission as an organization and the desired outcomes.
Awesome, fantastic. Anything you would add, Clint, or anything around like an employee recognition program or anything that you do over at J&J?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's great when you have a mix of some of the formal kind of tools and methods, as well as a lot of the informal things that have been highlighted. We're fortunate if we do have a great program where anybody can go in and recognize anybody else. And you can recognize them at varying levels, based on the degree of kind of work that they put forward. So it could be as simple as a thank you that's really just a note. It could also come with, on the other extreme, pretty substantial, cash awards that, obviously have to kind of go through some level of approval. But it's a really nice way that empowers people, I think, to give recognition peer-to-peer, team leader, giving that recognition out to their team. So there's that. I know performance management was something that kind of came up, I think, last year with a number of companies, coming out very early and acknowledging that they were going to, approach performance management differently. We certainly made some adjustments, on our end as well, in terms of, what we kind of expected, and particularly the recognition of what people put forward in terms of effort, not just the results that you might typically kind of over-index on. So I think that's an important piece of this, because you can't give somebody that heartfelt note and then have this system that also doesn't recognize them. I think kind of both have to work together. But I've shared I thought one of the coolest things that my boss did for his entire function. So he leads a very large portion of the Johnson & Johnson HR organization, and he gave at the end of last year $100 to every employee to spend with their family. So he said, look, your new colleagues for the year have been your family, so take $100 and then do something special and kind of take pictures as you're doing it. So we had some people that rented out a movie theater for their whole family. So you saw them, this picture of like a family of four in a full movie theater. Some ordered in special dinners. Some found different activities to go do. But it was a fun way of celebrating each other, celebrating those that also suffered and went through all of this did this experience with us. And I thought was really a neat way of recognizing.
That is cool. I love the picture part of that too, sharing it, right? I think that's one thing we've been trying to be more purposeful with, like even on the weekends, not expecting anyone to reply, but maybe dropping into our Slack and dropping a photo from our weekend that we're doing to kind of share with our team. This is what we're up to, and kind of give that different look, I think, to kind of the whole hybrid environment, the whole remote workforce together. So I love that. That's really cool. I think the last topic here we had before we'll jump into questions is around how do we measure to improve engagement? I think this is a big topic here and something we can spend some good time on. But really, how do we measure, engagement, pre and post, and what are the differences? And we also had a question from the audience come in that I think will fit in perfectly in this section. So I'll start it off first with going over to you, Clint, again. So kind of what was your employee engagement measurement, maybe prior to the pandemic and prior to this whole transition, and kind of how has that changed, and how do you measure that, if at all, right now?
Yeah, so pre-pandemic, we had two big surveys that we would run, and each one would run kind of every other year. So basically every September, a survey was run. One was specifically around our credo and kind of us as a company holding ourselves accountable to all of our employees to make sure that we were living that. And then the other was a bit more of a traditional employee engagement survey. So that's what was done pre-pandemic. Once we went into the pandemic, we started taking some subsets of those questions and pulsing our employees, on a regular basis. So every week, some portion of the J&J organization was submitting their input around how we were doing, what they were looking for. Additional questions were asked outside of traditional engagement ones around how employees were feeling about the current situation, depending on where we were in the course of the year, their comfort levels with thinking about the timing of when to come back to work. I mean, all kinds of stuff that we ran in these employee sentiment surveys, and it's changed, I think, fundamentally the way that we will be gathering insights. It's been really insightful. They've done a good job of communicating back, holistically around what our employees are feeling and sensing, and I think it's been a much more effective way for the voice of the employee to be heard, and I feel like all the way to the top, they've done a great job of acknowledging that and then sharing and adjusting kind of some plans that may have been originally laid based on the feedback that has come from the employees.
That makes sense, and I think the frequency update makes a lot of sense, especially in kind of what we've been going through. Anything you'd add there, Eric, for what you guys are doing?
Similarly, treating it less as an event, like an annual,
Yeah.
annual employee engagement survey. Do it once, and then we won't talk about it again until next year. That I think that is challenging. So a shift to making it more of a journey of growing engagement and understanding engagement. I think what's particularly important for organizations is disaggregating the data, particularly around demographics. That's demographic information, right? Do you want to understand how different populations and communities are experiencing the organization in order to get a richer picture, more of a 360 view of what engagement means? And that means that the idea of individuals' emotional commitment to their organization and its goals. Like that's how I think of engagement. So you want to look at that through the lens of different identity measures and have enough self-awareness and system awareness to know who might those populations be, right? That are marginalized or less likely to be closer to the center of the organization and its inner workings. I think it's important to disaggregate that data and find meeting and actionable insights that you can take to strengthen engagements and ask questions like, who is less likely to be included in my work, right? And then check how data lines up with those experiences. And it may or may not, but at least you can take action as opposed to treating your organization as a monolith and saying, oh, everybody, 80% is satisfied here, done, we're good to go. And I'd also say looking at it and breaking it down by a couple of the key levers. So we look at the organizational one, but engagement is fueled by fit and satisfaction with a person's job, manager, people, and organization. So are they in the right position? Are they in the right role? Are they in the right job for them? What is that relationship to their manager? Because that informs a huge piece of performance. Often 70% of performance is driven by that relationship to an individual supervisor or manager, and then other people. So how do people connect to other people in the organization? Do they feel like they have someone they can trust in relationships beside their manager? And then there's an overall organization, which is what, again, those employment surveys typically connect on, but the other three, we might not get as rich data about that we can actually have actionable insights to really increase engagement.
Awesome. And Michelle, anything you want to add there before we jump into the question?
Only one really quick thought. I kind of joked or murmured about not having a playbook of getting through this. I would say that any organization not taking advantage of measuring employee engagement to some degree, that is your pathway, that is your roadmap. You need to identify those tools and the approach to take, whether it's just a simple employee net promoter score of would I recommend this organization to my family or friends, or a full engagement survey. I will also add that I'm going to be very interested in the approach engagement surveys are taking beyond the typical dimensions of engagement. I think that we will find that we're going to also need to move into overall well-being, including mental health support of employees. We've seen the impact that it has had on people, their mental health, by having so much change and uncertainty live in our world, and it's not probably going to go away. And so we ironically, as a group, just launched our annual engagement survey, and we were intentional about including specific questions, asking what other resources or tools would you like to see us provide beyond what's already been provided for your overall well-being. We also asked them to give us one word to describe in their life outside of work that is creating pressure, wanting to see if there's themes, again, to identify roadmaps, using that data to help us be intentional in our drivers. So it'll be very interesting. And I hope we all take an advantage to go into that vulnerable place of having conversations such as mental health and what can we do as an organization to support you, to know that we care.
Yeah, definite shift there. And that's a fantastic shift that I hope to see as well. And I think it's a great call out and great addition. So thank you so much for sharing, everybody. This has been fantastic. Let's quickly take this question here, and then we're about to wrap up. We got about 5 minutes left. So how do you, just a question to the panel in general, how do you balance work remotely, especially when you have eager high achievers and others generally tenured who do maybe not as much and don't have like the less of a, push or drive to try and get work done? That's a hard dynamic. That's a hard question. So I'll just to re-put it another way. So how do you manage, someone who's maybe an eager high achiever versus someone who's more tenured and not as eager to, be working as hard as maybe the individuals who just started?
So I mean, I'm happy to give that a go first. I guess for me, this doesn't, I don't know that the remote work has anything to do with this one for me. I think it's really an age-old question, which is, how are you holding people accountable for results? And is it about FaceTime and, the number of hours they're spending in Zoom meetings and that sort of stuff, or are you holding them accountable to get the job done? And I think in this case, if those that we all know, and the secret to work has been, the reward for doing good work has always been more work. And so there's people that are out there that want to excel and drive their careers forward and are willing to do more work that comes with doing that. And there's others that that balance matters a lot more. And so I think, as leaders, just holding people accountable for the results that they produce, I think is probably the key. But that's my two thoughts.
Clint, can I add on to what you're saying too? I totally agree. It is the responsibility of leaders to be able to see what is needed and hold those on their team accountable for their success, but it's also the team member. Like I'm responsible for myself too. So if I'm uber eager and I want to keep stretching and growing, I need to make sure that I'm sharing that aspiration. And I hope my leader has created an environment that allows to share that need from me. And if my leader hasn't, then find someone in the organization where you can have that conversation. The responsibility of development of psychological safety as well can run both ways within an organization. And so I think it's important to make sure that is communicated to employees, that we want to know what they need and want to stretch and do and create avenues for them to do it. So totally agree with you, Clint, and it just goes both ways.
No, that was a great comment, Michelle. Totally agree.
So I think we'll take the last question here and then we'll wrap up for the day. The last question is there any tools that you use to teach and train your employees? Are there any new tools that you're using to teach and train employees, especially now while many employees are remote? So any tips or anything there, anything from Slack to Zoom or whatever you're using, I think what people are looking.
Or class.
Or class.
You didn't want to do the plug, so I'll do it for you. I mean, it's remarkable the new tools that are coming out. There's so many options with technology. To me, it's understanding what your need is, and then finding the right resource or partner to provide that for your organization.
Fantastic. One that I've used on our team is Miro. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's like a collaborative space where you can all of the team can join and have like a whiteboard that they can play inside of. It's a requirement on my team now. So definitely one tool we found and embraced as well. And of course, we use Class every day at our company as well. So that's something that we are near and dear to and love as well. Awesome. Well, I want to thank Michelle, Clint, Eric. This was an amazing conversation. Just fantastic across the board. We still have some questions coming through, but we do want to make sure we aware of everyone's time and be sensitive to that. So thank you so much for coming and joining us today. I think you brought a lot of good insights, a lot of good things and keys for people to learn from, and kind of embrace as we kind of go more into this hybrid or remote, learning. And I'm sorry, I should say workforce. So thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
All right, thanks for having us.
Appreciate it.